Do you find yourself being an outsider? Are you a stranger? Are you a bit weird? Or are you peculiar? Well, we just might have the home for you. Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter and today we're going to be looking at, it's a film. It's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. This is directed by Tim Burton and it came out in 2016, so quite a modern film. I mean, obviously we flit about the decades when we review books and films and board games. Now, I hadn't heard of the book. This is based on a book, and it was a novel, 2011, by Ransom Riggs. Now, I don't know much about the book, I don't know much about the author, and I first became aware of this because of the film. I became aware of it, and I was intrigued. It looks gothic, it looks peculiar. Well, after all, it is a Tim Burton film. So let's just see how peculiar it really is. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. What is it all about? What's the setup? Well, opens up, Jacob, he's your typical teenager. He's stacking shelves at a local supermarket. He's got a bit of a humdrum life. He does seem a little bit socially awkward, bit of an outsider, and you could just say he's just like every other teenager out there. His life isn't very exciting. And he does have a grandfather that's still alive, and we get introduced to him. His name is Abraham. And Abraham has, since he was a little child, no, hang on, do that the other way. Jake, since he was a little child, has been listening to stories by his grandfather all his life about how his grandfather survived World War II and that they were battling monsters. Yes, monsters, and by that I don't mean the enemy. But it's an enemy of sorts, but they are proper monsters. And also, he talks of a strange home, a home for peculiar children, where children who have got sort of special abilities, if you like, that they're not normal, they're different from the norm. And so obviously Jake's growing up with these stories, and of course he just thinks they're just stories, you know, they can't be real. He obviously reaches a certain age where he starts questioning them. But, you know, they're great stories, and he does have a fantastic relationship with his grandfather. There is also a point in the film, this is all in the beginning of the film, so I'm not going to do any spoilers. He turns 16, and he's panicked because he gets a phone call from Abe, from his grandfather. And he goes to Abe's house, and something's not quite right. And, again, this isn't really a spoiler, but he finds his grandfather is dying and he's got his eyes removed. So Abe is just on death's door, and he has a sentence for him, and he says, "The loop of September the 3rd, 1943. So we've got a bit of a mystery. We've got the what the hell is all this about? That's the setup. Now that first little bit, you might think, oh, you know, you've told me a little bit too much information about the film. But that happens really in the first 5 minutes. It's kind of like the hook, it's the setup. So that's why I thought I'd tell you about it, because otherwise it's just about a teenage boy in his humdrum life. So there you go. So I'll leave that there, I'll leave the setup there. I don't really want to give too much more away on that. The themes, the main theme, as you can imagine, it's all about growing pains. If you are a teenager, obviously we've all been teenagers, you know what a difficult transition that can be, not necessarily to everybody, but it can be, from growing from a child through that tricky phase of you're not quite a child, but yet you're not quite an adult. But you might feel like you're an adult, and it's only then when you go, you know, into your early 20s or, you know, even late 30s that you sort of look back and go, wow, teenager, you really think you know it all, you really don't think you need advice from anybody. But you do, you just do, and it's only when you grow older that you realise that. And obviously, certainly as I'm growing older, you kind of realise that everything that you kind of knew before seems different. You have a different take on it, a different perspective on it. So this film is very much seen through the eyes of Jake and the growing pains of what it means to be, you know, having that transition from a child to an adult. There is sexual awakening in this film. Now, this is a family film, so it doesn't go, graphically into this, but there is a bit of a romance that starts to develop, and, because he's a teenager, he's 16, it's kind of like, I guess, his first serious kind of foray into this kind of thing. So there is that difficulty, again, where you're trying to find about identity. So that's another theme. It's all about identity of who you are in terms of, your changing environment, maybe because you're hanging out at different places because you're a teenager. You're not doing kid things anymore, but you're not quite an adult, so you're not kind of in that world. So you're between two worlds. So your identity can be questioned, and you're trying to find your identity. And not only that, another theme is being the outsider. Now, I guess we've all experienced being the outsider, even if it's not necessarily from from mainstream, but there could be things that you're just, very small things where you just have that feeling of being an outsider, that you don't really fit in. But then there comes that question of, why do we feel like we need to fit in? I guess it's because we are social beings and we don't like to be excluded from things. So you have Jake going through that because he is socially awkward, and he has that feeling of, well, everybody else seems to be getting on fine, why am I not getting on fine? I'm not like the other kids. This film also looks at, and again, because of it takes that idea of being different and everybody having sort of unique abilities, if you like, in real life, but we wouldn't call them abilities. I guess we do, abilities and skills, like if you go for a job. But then this takes it to the next level, because there are these peculiar, what they're known as peculiar children, that do have very strange and different sort of non-human, non-normal human. Ooh, is it raining? It's raining behind. I don't know if you can hear that now, but that just sets the scene because it's very gothic, this film. I quite like the rain. Yay. So yes, I was saying about the peculiarity. These then extends to proper things. So without giving too much away, you might have a special ability where somebody can float, or somebody's immensely strong, too strong for a normal human. So these abilities aren't, they're not going to be life-changing. Well, they are life-changing, but they're not superpowers as such. So they're not superheroes. They're just people that have got slightly different attributes than the rest of us. And some are more peculiar than others, I'll give you that. And therefore, you can imagine, and again, I don't want to give too much plot away, but because they are different, then they're shunned by normal conventions and normal people, if you like. So they decided it would be better if they kind of just keep themselves to themselves. So it does bring into that question, well, what is normal? Who gets to determine what normal is, if you see what I mean? So there is that sense of wanting to belong, but then also you can explore the theme of, well, maybe I don't really want to belong to that group of people because you might disagree with their views. So again, your identity as a person determines how you react to belonging and being that outsider. Now, another theme is all about father and son relationships, or I should say grandfather, father and son relationships, because their father, it does feature very heavily in this film as well. And it's a nice touch because the grandfather and Jake, so the grandfather and the grandson, seem to be on the wavelength, the same wavelength. They're of the same type of people, so they have a natural connection. Now the father, and it's nice because they've not gone too, it's not too cliche like, oh, he's a terrible father, he's distant. No, the father's lovely. The father's, warm, friendly, and really cares about Jake. But he's a different type of person. He's not necessarily on the same wavelength. And again, that can happen in families. So it was nice that they explored those three relationships and doing it from an emotional point of view as well. The father wasn't necessarily, all about brawn and strength. No, he talked about his feelings. He was very, very much a modern man. The grandfather was a bit more like, the sort of typical grandfather, but had a lovely warmth and, a twinkle in his eye. Again, I don't want to give too much away about what the hell's going on, but what I will say is, overall, The film looks fantastic. That's the first thing that you embrace. It has, obviously it's Tim Burton, so if you've watched lots of Tim Burton, you know there's a distinct style. There's that sort of gothic, horror, fantastic, fantasy kind of feel to it. And this is one of those films that starts off in real life, whatever real life is, and then crosses into, the more fantastical. And the special effects, obviously you can imagine, are very well done. There's some really beautiful set pieces. I mean, the set pieces are fantastically done. There's a lot of action in this film, as well as there is a lot of downtime. Not downtime, what am I trying to say? More emotional content in there. The acting is superb. I mean, it's got a stellar cast. You've got Asa Butterfield, who plays Jake. You've got Eva Green. You've got Chris O'Dowd. You've got Rupert Everett, Terence Stamp. You've even got Judi Dench and Samuel L. Jackson, and a few more. I haven't listed them all. So it's a good, solid cast. So all the ingredients are there. You've got Tim Burton directing. It's based from a book, and books are normally, they've taken gestation time, 2 or 3 years to write. Maybe an author might have spent a lot of time on it. So you like to think that the books are going to be solid. You've got the gothic fantasy setting. You've got all the peculiar, the strange, which I'm very drawn to as a subject matter. And yet, it just slightly missed the target. It slightly missed the emotional connection for me. I did care for the characters, but I didn't really care for the characters. And I think there's a subtle difference about the level of enjoyment when you don't necessarily connect fully with the characters. And I'm not 100% quite sure what it is. I think it's something to do with the story and the way that the story was told. It's quite, I don't know what the word is, messy. It kind of jumps about a bit, and it's not clear, clean narrative storytelling. So I think that probably gets in the way as well. Plus, I do think that, I know I've not read the book, and I want to read the book now, so I will be reading the book and doing a review of that. Because I've got a feeling that this works better as a book, because I'm pretty sure you would get to know a lot of the children, the peculiar children, and Miss Peregrine a lot better. There would be more emotional connection by reading it. And so, but I'm very curious to see if I do have the same feeling after reading it than after watching it. So I would recommend watching it though. It is definitely, there are definitely worse films. It's not a bad film at all. If I was to give it a mark, I'd say it's a 6 or a 7, maybe a 7 out of 10. It's one of these films that's a solid film. It's enjoyable. It's an hour and a half. You certainly don't come away thinking, oh, that was a waste of time. No, you would enjoy it. It's a kind of film that if it was on telly, yeah, I would say go for it. If it's on Netflix or if it's just kind of there, definitely watch it. And it is fun. It has a lot of fun to it. There's a lot of, but there is serious moments too. And I would say it's one of these family films that the adults, as an adult, you could enjoy it as well as the kids. It's not, you're not going to sit there being bored. There's enough going on for you to really enjoy it. But again, as I just want to reiterate, that kind of just slightly misses the mark. So there you go. That is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar... I knew I'd never be able to say that cleanly every single time. For Peculiar Children. Maybe that's my special ability. Never pronouncing words properly. There you go, Tim Burton film. It did actually do pretty well at the box office. It was made for $110 million, that is, and it raked in $296.5 million. So yeah, it was healthy. It was definitely healthy. And it's certainly one of his better films, so don't be put off by me thinking, no, it's slightly missed. It's definitely worth watching. And I will also say I've said this before, I'm going to be reading it, so I'm going to be looking forward to reading the novel. Anyway, if you have read the novel, maybe leave some comments on this episode, or if you want to join the Facebook Fellowship, on Facebook obviously, all you need to do is search for the Bottled Imp Fellowship, click join and we'll add you in, and then maybe you could start a thread, maybe you could start a discussion about the book compared to the film. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Remember to keep it unreal, especially if you're peculiar.